The year is 1812. The fate of the British Empire teeters on a knife's edge, but not on the familiar battlefields of Europe, where the Duke of Wellington wrestles with Napoleon Bonaparte. Far from the grand manoeuvring of the peninsula, across the cold, grey expanse of the Atlantic, a different crisis is brewing, one that threatens to sever Britain's timber trade and naval supplies, effectively strangling the Royal Navy. The setting is the vast, untamed wilderness of Upper Canada, a colonial backwater defended by a skeleton crew of regulars and a scattered, demoralized militia. Here, the silence of the deep woods is about to be shattered by the march of a new enemy. The United States, sensing Britain's distraction in Europe, has declared war, their eyes fixed on the vulnerable northern territories. Standing between this imperial catastrophe and the encroaching American ambition is a man whom history would largely forget, overshadowed by the giants of his era. Major General Sir Isaac Brock is a study in frustration. A career soldier of the 49th Regiment, Brock possesses a sharp intellect and a boundless kinetic energy that chafes against the stillness of his posting. For years he has languished in the colonies, watching from afar as his peers cover themselves in glory and ribbons, fighting the French. To Brock, Canada is a cage, a place where promising careers go to die amidst the pines and the snow. He yearns for the clash of major armies, but fate has handed him a crumbling frontier outpost, ill-equipped, underpopulated, and seemingly doomed. However, the true danger Brock faces is not merely the approaching American army, but the parchment orders sitting on his desk. The instructions from his superior, Governor-General Sir George Prevost, and the distant parliamentarians in London are explicit, rigid, and suffocating. The directive is clear: maintain a strict defensive posture. The Crown, exhausted by the Napoleonic conflict, is desperate to avoid escalating hostilities in North America. They believe that a diplomatic solution might still be found if provocation is avoided. Brock is ordered to wait, to retreat if pressed, and above all, not to attack. Brock, however, reads the landscape differently. He understands the grim arithmetic of the frontier. He knows that a defensive war in a territory as vast as Upper Canada is a mathematical impossibility. To sit inside the forts is to invite a slow, suffocating defeat. The American forces, vastly superior in numbers and resources, need only to wait for the British supplies to dwindle. Brock realizes that defense is simply a polite word for surrender. But the military code is unforgiving. To disobey a direct order from the Governor-General is not merely a professional misstep, it is an act of treasonous insubordination. The stakes are terrifyingly high. If Brock defies Prevost and launches an unauthorized campaign, he risks everything. If he fails, if he loses the king's soldiers in a reckless gamble, there will be no mercy. He would face a court-martial, immediate disgrace, and quite possibly the firing squad, the soldiers' gallows. The shadow of execution hangs over every map he studies. Yet, as reports filter in, of American General William Hull gathering a massive invasion force at Detroit, Brock sees the paralysis of his superiors as a death sentence for the colony he is sworn to protect. The atmosphere in the British headquarters is thick with tension. Junior officers look to their commander, sensing his agitation. Brock paces the floorboards, the weight of the empire pressing down on his shoulders. He knows that London views this theatre as a distraction, a sideshow to the real war in Europe. They are willing to sacrifice territory for time, but Brock is not. He looks at the map of the Great Lakes, specifically the strategic choke point of the Detroit River. He sees what the bureaucrats in Quebec City cannot, that the only way to save the weak is to act with the ferocity of the strong. In the quiet of his quarters, Isaac Brock makes a decision that defies all conventional military wisdom and political prudence. He decides that he will not wait to be conquered. He will not safeguard his own career at the expense of the province. He chooses to ignore the explicit commands of the Governor-General. He chooses the path of the rebel within the ranks. With a grim determination, he prepares to strip the garrisons, leaving the rear exposed, to launch a desperate, unauthorized, and seemingly suicidal offensive. The forgotten general is about to step out of the shadows and onto the path of high treason, gambling his life to save an empire that has ordered him to stand down. Brock wastes no time in translating his treasonous resolve into action. With the speed that characterizes his entire military existence, he commandeers boats and gathers what few regulars he can spare from the 49th Regiment. He strips the defences of York and the Niagara frontier to the bone, a gamble that leaves the heart of the colony exposed to any secondary American thrust. It is a terrifying roll of the dice. If the Americans attack in the centre while Brock is racing west, Upper Canada will be cut in half before he can fire a shot. But Brock is possessed by a singular strategic vision. The centre of gravity is not in the forts, but in the mind of the enemy commander. The target of Brock's obsession is Fort Detroit, a formidable American stronghold situated on the western edge of Lake Erie. Inside its walls sits Brigadier General William Hull, a veteran of the Revolutionary War. On paper, Hull holds every advantage. He commands an army of nearly 2,500 men, well stocked with ammunition and heavy artillery. By contrast, Brock is scraping together a force that barely numbers 700 regulars and militia, supplemented by roughly 600 indigenous warriors. In any standard military academy, the lesson would be simple. The British are vastly outnumbered, outgunned, and attacking a fortified position. Defeat is a mathematical certainty. However, Brock has identified a weakness that no supply ledger can quantify. He knows that General Hull is an old man, weary and prone to hesitation. More importantly, Brock understands that Hull is paralyzed by a deep, visceral terror of indigenous warfare. The American general is haunted by nightmares of the frontier, of the scalping knife and the ambush. Brock determines that his campaign will not be fought with muskets and cannons alone, but with fear. He intends to weaponize Hull's own anxieties, turning the American commander's imagination into the British Army's most potent asset. Before the first boot hits the ground of the staging area of Amherstburg, Brock has already begun to tighten the noose. He leverages the often overlooked provincial marine to seize control of Lake Erie. It is a masterstroke of logistical warfare. By dominating the water, Brock effectively severs Hull's supply lines, isolating the massive American force in the wilderness. The hunters have become the hunted, trapped in their own fortress, their communications cut, their food supplies dwindling, and the psychological walls closing in. But the linchpin of Brock's audacious gambit lies in an alliance that defies the rigid social hierarchies of the British Empire. Upon arriving at the frontier, Brock seeks out the one man who commands the respect of the disparate tribes of the Northwest Confederacy, the Shawnee war chief, Tecumseh. Their meeting is a moment of electric historical convergence. On one side stands Brock, the tall, scarlet-coated aristocrat, a symbol of imperial order. On the other stands Tecumseh, a warrior statesman of immense presence, fighting a desperate war for his people's survival against American expansion. In a move that shocks his own staff, Brock breaks with all established protocol. He does not treat Tecumseh as a subordinate or a mercenary. He treats him as an equal. In the flickering light of a council fire, Brock unfolds his maps and shares his plans openly, asking for the chief's counsel. It is a level of respect rarely accorded to indigenous leaders by European officers. Tecumseh, a shrewd judge of character, recognizes a kindred spirit in the British general. He sees a man of action, a warrior who leads from the front. Turning to his own braves, the great chief gestures to Brock and declares that finally, here is a man. This bond seals the fate of the campaign. Together, they concoct a plan that is sheer madness to the conservative military mind. They decide to cross the Detroit River and assault the fort directly. It is a violation of every rule of warfare to attack a superior force entrenched behind stone walls. Yet Brock and Tecumseh are operating on a different plane. They are counting on the speed of their movement and the depth of Hull's cowardice to shatter the American defense before physical reality can assert itself. As the British troops and Shawnee warriors prepare for the operation, the air is thick with anticipation and dread. The soldiers know the odds. They know they are marching into the teeth of an enemy who outnumbers them 2-1. They also know that their commander is disobeying orders from the highest levels of government to lead them there. But as they look at Brock, energetic and confident, and at Tecumseh, stoic and fierce, a strange confidence begins to take hold. They are about to launch an impossible attack, driven by a general who fears failure more than death, and a chief who fights for the very soul of his land. The audacious gambit is in motion, and there is no turning back. The battle for Detroit begins not with the roar of cannon fire, but with the quiet scratch of a quill pen. Brock, acutely aware of General Hull's psychological fragility, initiates a campaign of deception designed to break the enemy's will before the armies even meet. He drafts a letter intended for his own officers, a piece of correspondence he ensures will fall into American hands. In the letter, Brock strikes a tone of grim resignation, lamenting that while he commands the regular troops, he will be utterly unable to control the thousands of indigenous warriors allied with him once the slaughter begins. He paints a horrifying picture of inevitable massacre, absolving himself of the impending brutality. It is a masterful bluff, a cold calculation designed to terrorize an old man who already fears the wilderness. Simultaneously, on the Canadian side of the river, the visual deception unfolds with theatrical precision. Tecumseh, understanding the game perfectly, marches his warriors through a small clearing visible from the American fort. As they pass into the tree line, they circle back around, hidden by the dense foliage, only to march through the clearing again and again. To the terrified American sentries peering through spyglasses, it appears as though an endless stream of warriors, an entire nation on the warpath, is assembling for the assault. Brock adds to the illusion by taking spare scarlet tunics from the 49th Regiment and distributing them among the untrained Canadian militia. From the distant ramparts of Detroit, the ragged farm boys of Upper Canada are transformed into the disciplined, feared regulars of the British line. Hull sees an army twice its actual size, a red wall of imperial power, flanked by a horde of unstoppable warriors. While this theatre of fear plays out on the frontier, a very different kind of conflict is simmering in the halls of power. In Quebec City and London, the political machinery is grinding against Brock's initiative. Governor-General Prévost is besieged by anxiety. Diplomatic channels suggest that the American government might be open to a truce, a suspension of hostilities that could end the war before it truly begins. To the cautious administrators, Brock's aggressive posturing is a nightmare, a cowboy diplomacy that threatens to derail sensitive negotiations. They view his movements not as heroism, but as a dangerous liability. Letters are hastily written, sealed with the wax of imperial authority, commanding Brock to cease all offensive operations immediately. Riders are dispatched with urgent orders to rein in the rogue general. The political establishment is mobilizing to stop him, to pull him back from the brink of what they perceive as a catastrophic error. Brock is fighting a dual war, one against the Americans in front of him and another against the bureaucracy behind him. He knows the orders to halt are likely already on the road, carried by couriers riding hard to catch him. He is racing against the speed of the mail service. If the orders arrive before he takes Detroit, he will be forced to stand down, leaving the colony vulnerable and his career in ruins. On the morning of August 15th, Brock decides he can wait no longer. He orders the British shore batteries to open fire. The silence of the river valley is obliterated as iron roundshot hammers the wooden palisades of Fort Detroit. Inside the fort, panic begins to take hold. The bombardment is relentless, smashing into the officers' mess and killing men instantly. General Hull, shaken and swilling heavily from a bottle of brandy, cowers in the safety of a hardened shelter. his resolve crumbling with every impact. The next morning, Brock plays his final card. Clad in his full dress uniform, a brilliant scarlet target against the green and brown of the landscape, he leads his troops across the river. It is a movement of supreme confidence. As the British boats hit the American shore, the troops form up for a bayonet charge. They are marching toward a fortified enemy equipped with heavy cannons that could shred their ranks with grape shot in seconds. To the soldiers in the line, it feels like a death march. But Brock rides at the front, calm and imperious, betting his life that the psychological seeds he planted have taken root. He is defying the crown to serve the crown, pushing forward into the kill zone, while the orders to retreat are galloping toward his empty headquarters. The clash of wills has reached its zenith. The paralyzed fear of General Hull, the cautious indecision of the British government, and the singular, driving audacity of Isaac Brock. As the British columns advance, the air hangs heavy with the expectation of a slaughter. But Brock's eyes remain fixed on the flagpole of the fort, waiting for a sign that his gamble has paid off. As the British regulars and Canadian militia close the distance to the fort's earthworks, the tension is palpable. Every soldier in the line braces for the inevitable eruption of the American batteries. They are walking directly into the kill zone of 24-pounder cannons, weapons capable of tearing through entire ranks of men with gruesome efficiency. The silence is deafening, broken only by the rhythmic tramp of boots and the rustle of equipment. Brock rides tall, a figure of icy calm amidst the anticipated storm, his eyes locked on the ramparts. He is gambling everything on the fragility of one man's nerve. Then, a sight appears that defies belief. Instead of the flash of muzzle fire, a white flag flutters above the walls of Fort Detroit. A ripple of disbelief passes through the British ranks. The American guns remain cold. General Hull, undone by the relentless bombardment and the terrifying prospect of an indigenous massacre he imagined to be inevitable, has crumbled completely. He does not merely offer a parley, he offers a total capitulation. The surrender that follows is one of the most lopsided victories in military history. In a stunning reversal of fortune, General Hull agrees to surrender his entire army. The gates of the fortress swing open, and the American garrison, nearly 2,500 strong, marches out to stack their muskets before Brock's vastly smaller force. It is a spectacle of surreal proportions. 700 British and Canadian troops, flanked by 600 warriors, accepting the surrender of an army more than double their size. The spoils of this audacious gamble are staggering. Brock secures 33 cannons, thousands of muskets, and immense stores of gunpowder and provisions, supplies that the impoverished Canadian militia desperately needs. Even the American brig Adams, a key vessel for control of the lakes, is handed over and swiftly renamed the HMS Detroit. In a single stroke, Brock has not only neutralized the primary invasion threat to Upper Canada, but has also re-equipped his own army at the enemy's expense. The American plan to conquer the North in a mere matter of marching has evaporated in a cloud of humiliation. For Tecumseh and his warriors, the victory is a validation of their faith in the British father. They watch with stoic satisfaction as the long knives, the Americans, are disarmed. Brock, true to his character, honors his alliance immediately. He presents Tecumseh with his own sash and a pair of pistols, a public gesture that cements the loyalty of the Northwest Confederacy. The border is secure, the flank is protected, and the impossible has been achieved without the loss of a substantial number of British lives. The impact of the victory travels like a shockwave. When the news finally reaches Quebec City, the consternation of the bureaucrats turns to stunned silence. The orders to restrain Brock, to force him back into a defensive crouch, are rendered instantly obsolete. He has moved faster than the ink could dry. The insubordinate rebel who risked court-martial has delivered a miracle. Across the Atlantic, the reaction is even more dramatic. In London, the gloom of the Napoleonic stalemate is momentarily lifted by the dazzling news from the colonies. The very parliament that would have censured Brock for his recklessness now erupts in celebration. The Tower of London guns, usually reserved for celebrating the victories of Wellington, boom out a salute for the capture of Detroit. The narrative shifts overnight. No longer is Brock the rogue commander flirting with treason. He is hailed as the saviour of Canada, a hero who embodies the very spirit of British pluck and daring. He is gazetted to be a knight of the Bath, the gallows forgotten, replaced by the promise of a ribbon and a star. Yet, amidst the toasts and the cannon fire, a sombre reality remains. Brock has saved the Empire's foothold in North America, but he has also awakened a sleeping giant. The United States, stung by the embarrassment at Detroit, will not make the same mistake twice. They will send new generals, younger and more aggressive, and they will bring the full weight of their industrial capacity to bear. Brock has bought Canada time, but he knows that the war is far from over. He stands victorious on the ramparts of Detroit, the accolades of the world rushing toward him, unaware that his unconventional path has led him not to a long retirement, but toward a final, tragic destiny on another battlefield. The euphoria of Detroit is short-lived. While London toasts the saviour of Canada, Isaac Brock finds himself back in the mud and chill of the Niagara frontier, staring down a new threat. The American government, humiliated but not defeated, has massed a new army across the Niagara River. They are determined to erase the stain of Hull's surrender. This time, there will be no timid generals or hesitation. The enemy is preparing to cross the turbulent waters and seize the high ground of Queenston Heights, a strategic ridge that commands the entire region. Brock is exhausted. The sheer physical and mental toll of the Detroit campaign has worn him down, yet his energy remains manic. He knows the colony is still perilously weak. The reinforcements he desperately needs are still months away, locked in the slow grind of the Atlantic crossing. He is once again forced to rely on his wits, his presence, and the fragility of the line he has drawn in the dirt. He sleeps with one eye open, his uniform laid out beside his bed, waiting for the inevitable alarm. In the pre-dawn darkness of October 13th, 1812, the silence is shattered by the roar of musketry and the boom of artillery. The Americans have launched their invasion. Under the cover of darkness, they have rowed across the swirling currents of the Niagara River, establishing a foothold on the Canadian bank. Brock wakes instantly to the sound of the guns. He does not wait for his staff to assemble. He mounts his horse, Alfred, and rides hard toward the sound of the fighting, the mud flying from the hooves as he races against time. Arriving at the village of Queenston, Brock finds a scene of chaos. The Americans have found a hidden fisherman's path up the steep cliffs and have seized the heights. From this commanding position, they are firing down upon the British village and the battery below. The situation is critical. If the Americans hold the heights, they can pour thousands of troops into Canada, effectively cutting the colony's defences in half. The impossible victory of Detroit is in danger of being undone in a single morning. Brock assesses the situation with the cold clarity of a veteran. He realizes that the heights must be retaken immediately before the Americans can reinforce their position. There is no time to wait for the main body of his troops to arrive from Fort George. He has only a handful of men, parts of the 49th Regiment and some militia. But waiting is not in Isaac Brock's nature. He believes that momentum is everything. He dismounts, drawing his sword in the cool autumn air. He turns to his men, soldiers who worship him, men who have seen him work miracles at Detroit, and orders them to follow. "Push on, brave York volunteers!" he shouts, his voice cutting through the din of battle. It is the classic Brock maneuver, leading from the very front, a conspicuous target in his scarlet coat and gold lace, defying the enemy to strike him down. He is trying to will his men up the slope through sheer force of personality. As he leads the charge up the steep, wooded incline, a sniper steps out from behind a thicket on the ridge above. The distance is short, perhaps only 30 paces. The American levels his musket and fires. The ball strikes Brock square in the chest, piercing his heart. The general stumbles, the sword dropping from his hand, and collapses onto the wet leaves of the Canadian autumn. He dies almost instantly, not with a final grand speech, but with the sudden, brutal silence of the battlefield. The charge falters. His aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Colonel John MacDonnell, enraged by the loss of his commander, leads a second, desperate wave to recover the body and take the hill. He too is cut down. For a moment, it seems that all is lost. The British line breaks, retreating down the hill, leaving the bodies of their leaders on the slope. The saviour of Canada lies dead in the grass, the architect of the Empire's defence silenced before the war is even half over. Yet, even in death, Brock commands the field. The sight of their fallen general galvanizes the arriving reinforcements. Under the command of Major General Roger Hale Sheaffe, the British and Indigenous forces launch a massive, coordinated flanking attack later that afternoon. Fueled by a desire for vengeance, they sweep the Americans off the cliffs, forcing another mass surrender. The Battle of Queenston Heights is a decisive British victory, securing the Niagara frontier for another year. But as the smoke clears and the cheers fade, the army realizes the terrible price of their success. The flag still flies over Canada, but the man who held the pole is gone. In the days following the battle, a peculiar and sombre event takes place along the Niagara River. As the British garrison prepares to bury their fallen commander, the American guns at Fort Niagara, the very cannons that had been firing upon Brock's troops just hours prior, begin to boom. They are not firing in anger, but in salute. In a rare display of chivalry that seems to belong to a bygone age, the American commander orders his batteries to fire a salute of respect during Brock's funeral procession. For a brief moment, the war pauses to honor the sheer audacity of the man who had defied them. It is a testament to the strange, magnetic quality of Isaac Brock. He was a soldier who commanded the admiration of his enemies as effortlessly as he commanded the loyalty of his troops. However, across the ocean, a tragic irony is unfolding, dictated by the slow pace of the age of sail. At the very moment Brock was bleeding out on the slopes of Queenston Heights, couriers in London were rushing to dispatch a ship carrying the insignia of the Order of the Bath. The Prince Regent, thrilled by the news of Detroit, had officially gazetted Brock for a knighthood. The ribbon and star, symbols of the highest royal favour, were crossing the Atlantic to be pinned on the chest of a man who was already buried in a bastion of Fort George. He would never know that his gamble had paid off not just militarily, but personally. He died a Sir in name, but never heard the title spoken. With his death, the looming threat of the gallows vanished instantly. The court-martial for insubordination, the parliamentary inquiries, the angry letters from Governor-General Prevost demanding an explanation for his reckless offensive, all of it evaporated. Death is the ultimate absolution. In dying for the crown, Brock transformed from a potential liability into an untouchable martyr. The politicians who had been wringing their hands over his cowboy diplomacy were now rushing to commission monuments in his honor. The narrative was sanitized. The rebel general who ignored orders was replaced by the flawless hero who gave his life for the Empire. Yet, despite this immediate deification, Isaac Brock slipped into a strange historical obscurity outside of Canada. In the grand, sweeping narrative of British military history, he is often relegated to a footnote. Why? The answer lies in the sheer scale of the conflict consuming the world at that time. While Brock was saving a colony with a few thousand men, the Duke of Wellington was commanding tens of thousands in Spain. While the Battle of Queenston Heights was a critical engagement, it was a skirmish compared to the carnage of Borodino or Leipzig. The War of 1812 was viewed by London as a distracting sideshow, an annoyance on the periphery of the titanic struggle against Napoleon. Consequently, the man who saved a continent was overshadowed by the giants who saved Europe. But to overlook Brock is to miss a profound lesson in military leadership. His story is a rare example of the man on the spot knowing better than the distant masters. Had Brock followed the prudent, Parliament-approved orders to remain on the defensive, the history of North America would be radically different. The United States would likely have absorbed Upper Canada by mere attrition, erasing the border that exists today. Brock's legacy is not just a statue on a hill. It is the geopolitical reality of the Northern Hemisphere. He proved that there are moments when the greatest risk is not action, but inaction, and that sometimes a general must be willing to sacrifice his career to save his cause. As the war dragged on for 2 more bloody years, the British leadership often found themselves wishing for another Brock. They sent more generals, more ships, and more regiments, but they could never quite replicate the electric momentum of those first few months. The forgotten general had set a standard of decisive, terrifying energy that neither his successors nor his enemies could ever quite match. The War of 1812 ended in a stalemate, a status quo antebellum where boundaries were restored and treaties signed. To the casual observer of history, it might appear that nothing changed. But this view ignores the fundamental reality that without Isaac Brock, there would have been no status quo to restore. There would have been only conquest. His defiance did not merely win a battle, it ensured the survival of a distinct cultural and political entity in North America. He literally drew the border with his sword, carving out a space where a separate nation, Canada, could eventually emerge. Brock's story forces us to reevaluate the nature of military command. In an era defined by rigid hierarchies and strict obedience to the crown, he embodied the paradox of the loyal rebel. He understood that true loyalty sometimes demands disobedience. He served the king's interests by defying the king's orders. It is a dangerous lesson, one that military academies are hesitant to teach, but it is the defining characteristic of the most pivotal figures in history. Nelson at Copenhagen putting the telescope to his blind eye. Brock at Detroit ignoring the letters of recall. These are the moments where the individual will supersedes the collective machinery of the state. Today, on the heights above the Niagara River, a massive limestone column towers over the landscape. At its summit stands the figure of Isaac Brock, arm outstretched, forever pointing toward the American shore. He is buried beneath it, alongside his aide-de-camp, MacDonald. It is a place of pilgrimage for those who know the story, but for the wider world, he remains a ghost. He is the forgotten general who fought a forgotten war. Yet, his influence is woven into the fabric of the modern world. Every time a map of North America is drawn, the line separating the United States from Canada stands as a silent testament to his audacity. The Redcoat era is often remembered for the discipline of the line, the unbreakable square, and the rhythm of the drum. But the story of Isaac Brock reminds us that beneath the uniform and the drill, the fate of empires often rests on the shoulders of a single individual willing to risk the gallows for a chance at glory. He was a man who saw the impossible not as a deterrent, but as an invitation. In the end, he saved an empire, defied a parliament, and became a legend, all before the mail could arrive to tell him to stop. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the forgotten hero of the British Empire, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories of military audacity and historical gambles, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. What do you think? Was Brock a genius or just lucky? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.